Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. This is the #1 Pokemon investing tip that I don't see covered enough, and it's the fact that it's always worth it to buy the better set. Now, what do I mean by the better sets? Well, obviously, every single era has the sets that are obviously the winners and has the sets that are a little bit lackluster, right? Let's go to Scarlet and Violet. Think of sets like Prismatic Evolutions, think of Destined Rivals, think of 151. Those are obviously the sets that are going to win long term. And then you have your sets that are a little bit lackluster. Maybe they still have some good cards. Maybe some people still like them, but they're obviously lackluster sets. Think of Scarlet and Violet base. Think of Shroud Fable. Think of even something like Obsidian Flame. A lot of people do like Obsidian Flames because it has a Charizard, but overall it's definitely one of the weaker sets of the era. Taking that logic into Sword and Shield, obviously the best buys during this time period were Evolving Skies, Lost Origin, and Fusion Strike. If you bought these boxes, you would have saw the most amount of return on investment versus buying Sword and Shield base, Rebel Clash, and Darkness Ablaze. However, there was a time when you could pick up Rebel Clash for around the same price as Evolving Skies, and I believe that that time is what we're experiencing right now with the Scarlet and Violet era. So let's take a look back into Sword and Shield just to see what happened back then, right? So first and foremost, let's go to May of 2023. Sword and Shield base was $250 a box. Let's look at Rebel Clash. In May of 2023, Rebel Clash was about $170. And let's take a look at Darkness Ablaze. In May of 2023, Darkness Ablaze was around $146. Now let's take a look at Evolving Skies, right? In May of 2023, Evolving Skies was $394, so about $400. So it was about double what Rebel Clash and Darkness Ablaze was, but it was, relatively close to the price of Sword and Shield base. It was maybe $100 more, $150 more than Sword and Shield base, while being the much better set, right? Let's take a look at the prices right now. Sword and Shield base is still at $550, so it's doubled in price in, 2.5 years. However, if you take a look at Evolving Skies, this has gone from 400 to 2,500. So it's more than 5x, 6x in price during the same time that Sword and Shield base has only 2x in price. So you guys can see that if you bought Sword and Shield base at this time, you would have lost out on so much money compared to buying Evolving Skies. So that is why you want to always buy the better sets, because these better sets always give you a much higher return on investment in the long term. In the short term, right? Short term being in the first 2 to 3 years of release, they're going to be relatively the same in terms of ROI. But then when you hit year 3, year 4, year 5, that's when you start to see the exponential price increases. Take a look at Rebel Clash, right? Rebel Clash, when it first came out, it was about $150. It stayed in that $150 range for a very long time. And then now it's finally starting to make a move. It's barely crossed the $350 price range, so it's only doubled in price once again since release, right? In the 5 years that's come out, it's only doubled in price. Same thing with Darkness Ablaze, right? When it came out, it was sitting in that 120 to 140 range for a very long time, and now it's finally making moves to the upside, and it's yet to even break $300. So while sometimes it might be tempting to buy into some of these, not top tier sets, right? Something like Scarlet and Violet base set, maybe you see it for really cheap, and maybe you're thinking, oh, this is a fantastic deal, right? I'll buy a lot of Scarlet and Violet base because I know it's going out of print, I know this is a base set, blah, blah, blah. But you have to understand that the price increases you can expect from these slightly lackluster sets just aren't going to compare to the price increases you're going to get from top sets like Evolving Skies. And same thing with Fusion Strike, right? Fusion Strike was sitting in that 100 to 150 range for a very long time. But then because this is such a strong set, we eventually do get an exponential price increase, which we are seeing now. And now Fusion Strike is basically a $1,000 booster box, right? So it's 10x in the same time that Sword and Shield base, Rebel Clash, and Darkness Ablaze have only 2x. Same thing with Chilling Reign, right? In May of 2023, Chilling Reign was $141, which was cheaper than Sword and Shield base. It was cheaper than Rebel Clash, cheaper than Darkness Ablaze, but right now it's almost double the price of all those sets, right? Same thing with Lost Origin. Lost Origin in May of 2023, where is it? May of 2023, it basically just released, and it was sitting at $140. And if you bought into Lost Origin at that time, basically at the same price as Rebel Clash and as Darkness Ablaze, you are now sitting at a 5x return. Now, another example I want to go over is going to be in the Sun and Moon era, because I think this applies to something like Shrouded Fable, right? Obviously, Shrouded Fable is, kind of known as the worst set of the Scarlet and Violet era, but a lot of people are kind of going against the grain and saying, oh, Shrouded Fable was actually a good investment. It's actually going to be underrated because it was so low printed. Well, let's take a look at the shining example of an underprinted, underwhelming set that a lot of people say that this set is doing well, and that's Dragon Majesty, right? Dragon Majesty was sitting in that $300 range for a very long time, and now it is at $774. So in about, let's say, 2.5 years, it's gone up double in price, which is pretty good. But if you compare Dragon Majesty, which is a very mid set, right? This is probably one of the worst sets of the Sun and Moon era. If you compare that to one of the top sets of the era in the same time frame, Team Up ETBs have gone from $400 to over $2,000. So this is, once again, over a 6x price increase in the same time that Dragon Majesty only went up 2x. So if you bought Dragon Majesty instead of Team Up in the same time frame, you would have lost out on a ton of money. One more example, let's take a look at Unified Minds, right? In 2023, you would have got this for about that $250, $290 range, and right now it's going well over $1,000. So once again, a 5x return versus if you bought Dragon Majesty, only a 2x return. But what you have to understand is that the price ceiling for some of these top sets is much higher than some of the lackluster sets. For a top booster box like Evolving Skies, the sky is literally the limit, right? There's no limit on this booster box, in my personal opinion. I think this is easily a 10k booster box in a couple of years. Compare that to Sword and Shield base, Rebel Clash, Darkness Ablaze. These, I believe, do have sort of a ceiling. It's going to be really hard for someone to even pay $1,000 for these boxes. There's just not going to be that much demand, and demand is what drives up prices. So although maybe some of these boxes like this Rebel Clash is scarce, you have to understand that demand is what drives value, and that is what drives the prices up. And not only that, but Evolving Skies is going to be more liquid even at $5,000, $10,000 than Sword and Shield base is going to be at $1,000. You want your booster boxes to have high demand, and not only is that going to drive the price up in the future, but it's also going to make it a lot easier to sell in the future. Things like Sword and Shield base is not going to have as high of a demand as Evolving Skies. And right now, we are seeing the same thing happen with the Scarlet and Violet era, right? We have sets like Obsidian Flames, which it's not a terrible set. I would say this is a much better set than Sword and Shield base, Rebel Clash, Darkness Ablaze. It's better than all of those other Sword and Shield sets, but I would say it's definitely lackluster in the Scarlet and Violet era just because it doesn't have too much depth, right? It has a good top chase card in the Charizard EX, but other than that, it doesn't have too much else going for it. It has a few good illustration rares, but just there's not too much quantity of hits in this set, and as you guys know, quantity of hits combined with quality, that's what makes a good set. This has one good quality card and basically no quantity, and you can see that the total set value reflects that. This is one of the lowest total set values in all of Scarlet and Violet. So the booster boxes right now for Obsidian Flames being $334, I just don't think that makes sense compared to something like Destined Rivals, which is an infinitely better set in my opinion. But these booster boxes are going for what? $426. These are actually about $370 on TCG Player. So you're basically paying about $40 more for Destined Rivals booster boxes versus Obsidian Flames, but you're getting a set that is much better, multiple times better. So in my opinion, this is the same situation we had a couple years back when we had Sword and Shield base being at $250 a box, and we had Evolving Skies being $390 a box, right? You had the much better set in Evolving Skies being a bit more expensive than something like Sword and Shield base, but it's a much better set, and years down the line that is going to pay off in dividends, and you're going to see exponential price growth in the better sets versus in the more lackluster sets. You're still going to see growth, but not as much growth as you would have gotten in the better set. Now let's talk about what sets in the Scarlet and Violet era I would categorize in this, best sets tier, right? So the ones that you should be buying versus the ones that you shouldn't be buying because they're more lackluster and they won't have as much price appreciation in the future compared to these sets. So obviously, Destined Rivals, Surging Sparks, and Prismatic Evolutions. I would also add 151, Paldean Fates, and Paldean Evolved to this list as well. And on the other side of things, I would say Scarlet and Violet Base, Obsidian Flames, Shrouded Fable, maybe you could say Paradox Rifts and Temporal Forces, but I actually like both of those sets. I think those are quite underrated, and I think those two sets are better than these three I have right here. So these three, I would say, are the ones that you should probably stay away from. Even if you get, a relatively good deal on these, I think long term you're still better off buying some of these other sets, especially Prismatic and Destined Rivals and 151. If I absolutely had to choose 6 sets from the Scarlet and Violet era, I'm going to be choosing Destined Rivals, Paldean Evolved, and Surging Sparks for my booster box sets. And for my specialty sets, I'm going to be choosing 151, Prismatic, and Paldean Fates, right? If I basically had to start over from scratch, these are the sets I would invest in and solely invest in the Scarlet and Violet era. I wouldn't touch any other sets. I would only touch these 6 sets in the Scarlet and Violet era because, in my opinion, even at today's prices, these are going to outperform the likes of Scarlet and Violet Base and Obsidian Flames and Shrouded Fable. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you found this useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.